Hari Om. Unmute, unmute. Now you can mute.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om Utsav from Tea Garden.
Hari Om. Long time.
बोलो कि listening recording.
कैसा है उत्सव? आज गरम
बहुत
कपड़ा
प्यारा
नहीं पहना?
हाँ,
गरम कपड़ा नहीं पहना आज?
बस मौसम बदल गया दिल्ली में।
अच्छा, इधर ठंड है।
हाँ,
गुड
सडनली
गुड
2 दिन से
टेक
मौसम
केयर।
बदल गया दिल्ली में। आज तो मतलब बाल भी गीले कर लिए मैंने।
अच्छा,
नहीं डरूंगा।
हैप्पी टू सी यू उत्सव।
Good to see you as well. Well, I'm not seeing you, but good to hear you.
उस recording सुनते हैं बोलो ना.
हम रिकॉर्डिंग भी सुन लेते हैं क्योंकि 7 बजे नहीं होता है कभी, तो रिकॉर्डिंग सुनती हूँ मैं।
अच्छा,
अप टू डेट कर लिया हम लोगों ने, दोनों ने, कल तक का।
बहुत बढ़िया।
मेरा फोन में नहीं आ रहा है पर मैसेज, देख लेने।
अच्छा, आप ग्रुप में नहीं हो क्या?
नहीं हूँ, पहले तो आया था, अभी नहीं आ रहा। 2
एक सेकंड।
दिन से
आप ग्रुप में नहीं हो, अभी ऐड कर दिया आपको।
अच्छा, थैंक यू।
Okay, let's start. Om
सहना
Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. So we will continue from where we left off and start with any questions. Are there any questions?
क्वेश्चन यही है कि अपना सुंदर मुखड़ा क्यों छुपा के लोगों ने रखा हुआ है? सुंदर सुंदर चेहरे हैं और बुर्का पहन के रखा हुआ है, काला काला नजर आ रहा है।
So those of you who would want to accede to OMG's request, feel free to turn on your video. Okay. The personality chart. We were discussing the personality chart. As mentioned last class, this is directly picked up from chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita, the first portion of the chapter 18. And it discusses in detail the various aspects of one's personality and one's actions, one's mental state. It's a snapshot of one's mental state. And the means of measurement are the 3 gunas. How you classify and measure yourself in the form of the 3 gunas: tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. Tamas being the state of inertia, of indolence, of laziness and lethargy, of procrastination. Rajas being the state of frenzied activity, of desire, of thirst, of passion, and sattva being the state of composure, of maturity, of peace, of clarity, of light. So human progress is tracked in the form of growth from tamas to rajas to sattva. He mentioned in the last class, you may acquire and enjoy whatever you want. You may have a great time in the world. There's no taboo, but it is not outward acquisition and enjoyment that measures the success of your life. While there is no taboo to it, see, there's a lot of confusion. Does the spiritual path mean that I have to be away from the world or I have to give up the world? Vedanta says there's no such taboo. You can be in the world, among it, enjoy it, do whatever you want. Yatha ichhasi tatha kuru. The Lord says in the Bhagavad Gita, Yatha ichhasi tatha kuru. But to steer your life spiritually is an inner goal you must have. In fact, that is above and beyond your outward achievements and enjoyments. It's the inner journey that is what matters more. In fact, that's what matters. And how to measure this inner journey is your growth from tamas to rajas to sattva. Spiritual growth is the increase in proportion of sattva. And spiritual enlightenment is 100% sattva. Spiritual growth is the increase in the proportion of sattva. And spiritual enlightenment is 100% sattva. Trans sattva, it's called, when you go even beyond sattva. So we discussed the elements of knowledge, action, and actor. We were in the middle of actor. So when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to the kind of understanding and worldview you have, even that is classified in the form of tamas, rajas, and sattva. We discussed last time, it is more of a worldview. What sort of worldview do you have? Sattvic worldview, sattvic knowledge is one that sees unity in the diversity, one that recognizes what's common rather than what's different and separate. Rajasic worldview is that which sees everything as separate and finds the diversity in the unity, finds differentiations, finds demarcations, finds separations. And whereas tamasic worldview is one of complete delusion, one of complete ignorance. It clings obstinately, arrogantly to what it thinks is the truth, what it thinks is right. Something else that the tamasic worldview, and you'll be able to relate to it because we all are guilty of this. It takes a part as if it were the whole, something we didn't touch upon last time. It takes a part as if it were the whole. See, we often say don't judge a book by its cover. Because what do we have the tendency to? We'll see one experience or one part or one aspect of someone or something and conclude something about their entire personality, conclude something about the object. So that is taking a part as the whole and clinging obstinately to that means you're not willing to change your perspective on it. You're not willing to see other aspects of it. One day you came to my class, you enjoyed it. Oh, what a great teacher, great, amazing. One day you come to my class and you hate it. Oh, what a terrible teacher. Taking a part and concluding the whole. You see someone in a nightclub, oh, what an indulgent person. And you conclude character assassination. You see someone in a temple, oh, what a great person. You have no idea what they're thinking inside. You have no idea. A momentary experience of something or someone makes you conclude, and then you stick obstinately to it. Means you're not willing to change your perspective. That worldview is tamasic. So save yourself from tamas. See, there's no harm in having an assessment of things. And of course, an assessment is based on whatever knowledge you have of that thing, right? Whatever limited knowledge you have of something, whatever limited experience you have of something, is what you have to use in your assessment and the conclusions you draw. See, but this is something, I learned in math. This is not philosophy. I learned in mathematics that whenever you conclude something, whenever you come to an understanding or an assessment or a conclusion about something, always be aware of your assumptions. When you study mathematics, when you're trying to prove something, and after the proof you come to a conclusion, you're always told, be conscious of what you have assumed, of your assumptions. So same holds true for human relationships, same holds true for your assessment of anything. Whenever you're concluding something, be conscious of your assumption. Oh, your assumption is that one or two experiences you had with someone. If the assumptions change, maybe the conclusion will change, right? So one is not asking you to be always open-ended and not come to an assessment, but be conscious of your assessments, of the assumptions in your assessments, and always have that open mind. That's the idea, right? The lack of an open mind is tamas. Further, he said, so tamasic, rajasic, sattvic knowledge prompts, leads to tamasic, rajasic, sattvic karma. So sattvic karma is one that is based on obligatory duty and responsibility. Action aligned with obligation is sattva. Now, unfortunately, in the world we live in, obligation is seen as a burden because no one knows what obligation means. We always think of obligation that is something that is imposed upon us, especially by orthodoxy or by elders of the family. Or that's not what obligation means. At least in Vedanta, that's not what obligation means. You decide your obligation. And your buddhi, your intellect, and your conscience is what will help you figure out your obligation. There are some things that, as per your buddhi, will be clear what you ought to do, what you ought not to do. There are some things that might not be clear. That's where your conscience will help you. It'll prick if you're not going against it, if you're going against your obligations. But first and foremost, how does your buddhi come to a conclusion about an obligation? Your goals in life, your roles in life determine your obligation. Some roles are given to you by life, and some roles you choose. Like they say, you can't choose your neighbors, you can't choose your family. Those are roles that are given to you by life. You've been wanting to move to a big apartment, wonderful apartment. You've been seeing it being constructed. You bought the flat pre-construction. Like in Gurgaon nowadays, everyone is buying flats pre-construction. Thousands of flats, DLF and all these companies are selling pre-construction. So you bought it, and 5 years later, the building is constructed, and you chose it. You chose to have that house. You chose to have that, but you didn't choose the person who bought the flat next to you. You may like them, you may not like them. Too bad. But you have certain roles and responsibilities as a neighbor. You have certain roles and responsibilities as a member of a family. So certain roles life chooses for you. It's not a direct choice of yours. Some roles you choose. You choose to be a business person, or you choose to be a married person, or you choose to be a employee. You choose to be an academic. You choose to be a student. Whatever you choose. You choose to be a friend. And having chosen to be a friend, having chosen to be an employee, having chosen to be a business person, etc., you have certain obligations. First of all, you ought to have clarity of what do you want, your goals and your values. Your goals and your values. Those goals and values determine what obligations you have in what role. So when we say sattvic karma is based on obligatory duty, it's not something which your mother or father or your chacha or your taiji told you to do. It's what you have chosen to do. Most of us don't think of our values. Most of us don't think of what we want. Most of us don't are not conscious of all the roles and responsibilities we have either been given or taken up. And because of that lack of consciousness, we are not conscious of our obligation. But consciousness of these roles determines what is obligation, determines what is responsibility. So, if nothing else, do learn this today. Vedanta's definition of obligation. It's not an externally imposed burden, it's something you choose for yourself. And something that you can clarify, you can get clarity of through your own buddhi, clarifying who you are, what you want to be. And once something is an obligation, and once there is clarity about the obligation, then you will be able to fight off the impulses of the mind. Sometimes the mind will be very willing to do the obligation, sometimes it won't be willing to. That doesn't matter. When there's clarity about the obligation, then you'll be able to regulate the mind. If there's no clarity about these obligations, the mind's likes and dislikes will take precedence. The mind's likes and dislikes will gain more power over your own choices. Right? So when you are aligned with obligation, with responsibility, then you'll be able to regulate and moderate like and dislike. You'll be able to channel your mind appropriately. And simultaneously, there is a lack of ego. There is no attachment to the action. There is no kartritva bhav. There is no bhoktritva bhav. There is a spirit of surrender. I'm doing what I have to do, and I leave the result to nature. Beautiful spirit of action. All of the Bhagavad Gita is simply, if you have to summarize the Bhagavad Gita, it's this concept. Align yourself to obligation, surrender the result to nature. Align your action to obligation, surrender the result to nature. That is sattvic action. On the contrary, what is rajasic action? In the absence of consciousness, in the absence of clarity of one's values and one's goals, one is simply driven by the mind's impulses, the mind's desires. What it really wants to do, what it wishes to do, what are its whims and fancies. So, rajasic action is desire ridden, prompted by the mind, in the absence of intellectual direction. Simultaneously, there is attachment to the action. So there is kartritva bhavana, a sense of doership. I am doing this. I am responsible for this. I am the architect of this. And there is a longing for the result. I wish I get it. I wish I get it. I wish I get it. I hope I get it. I hope I get it. If I get this, I will be happy. If I get this, I will be happy. So the attachment to action. On the one hand, there is a no clarity of one's obligation. It's mind driven. It's prompted by the impulses of the mind, merely by the impulses of the mind. Whereas also there is an attachment to the action. There is ego in the action, and this causes stress and strain. This causes worry and anxiety. This causes longing and hope and despair and all sorts of things. This causes palpitations. So it's not the action that tires you. It's not the action that stresses you. It's not the action that burns you out. It's this attitude. It's rajas that burns you out. If you can transform your action from rajasic to sattvic, you'll be able to do more and you'll be able to strain less. That's the idea. Tamas, on the other hand, arises out of complete ignorance. So that tamasic worldview we were talking about, tamasic knowledge, it leads to tamasic action. It arises out of complete depression. It arises out of complete a lack of awareness. A lack of awareness of what is needed to be done, a lack of awareness of what one ought to do, a lack of awareness of one's ability to do it. So we were talking about several types of tamasic actions in the last class. Rash actions, heedless actions, no consequence, no consciousness of the consequence. It causes harm to oneself and it causes harm to others. Even animals don't act in a tamasic manner. He's concluding by saying it offends human dignity and prestige, because even animals don't act in a tamasic manner. Animals are still rajasic predominantly. There's impulses, there's thirst, there's drives which prompt them to certain kinds of action. So when you're tamasic, you're worse than an animal. That's what he means. It offends human dignity. A human being ought not be tamasic. Rajas is still can still be forgiven. Huh? Rajas can still be forgiven. Tamas is it's a waste of a human life. And similarly, along similar lines, we have the um, bifurcation of an actor. So, what kind of actor is performing the action, right? For further clarity, for further see, when you read this like this, most of us don't have the opportunity to sit and discuss it, or don't have a guru who will come and clarify these things. We're lucky. We're lucky that we have Swami who has written this, but still, so this further bifurcation helps in clarification. It helps in providing a broader perspective. So last we discussed was sattvic and rajasic and tamasic actor. So who is a sattvic actor? One who performs sattvic action is a sattvic actor. So we said there is no doership, there is no longing for the result. Something important we mentioned last time. It's not that a sattvic actor is dull and boring, simply following the do's and don'ts from society. We already clarified obligation is driven by one's own choice, not imposed. At the same time, a sattvic person, he mentions this clearly in the Gita. See, he's not coming up with these words just by himself. Swamiji is not using these words just by himself. These words are used in the actual verse. A sattvic actor has, karta has, dhriti, has utsaha. These are actual words in the verses. I think it's verse chapter 18 somewhere in 1920, some verse like that. It has a sattvic actor has dhriti, has utsaha. So where is this utsaha, this enthusiasm coming from? This enthusiasm, this energy, this cheerfulness is coming from his alignment to his obligation. When you are inspired by your goal, when you are driven by your values, there is an energy. There's an energy far greater than the thirst of the result. Of course, the thirst of a result brings in a certain kind of enjoyment, brings in a certain kind of energy. But far greater than that thirst is the drive, is the inspiration of obligation, is the inspiration of one's values. So it's not that a sattvic person doesn't have energy, just where he draws his energy, his enthusiasm from is different. Most of us are used to drawing energy and enthusiasm from the thought of the result. It's like the example we give, right? You have to show a carrot. You know the carrot and the stick example? Most people have to be shown a carrot, because without the carrot they won't act. Carrot is an incentive. So for most of us, it is the carrot which inspires us, which gives us enthusiasm. But far different from incentive is initiative. When you're driven by clarity, when you're driven by a goal, when you're driven by certain higher values, you don't need incentive. You're driven by initiative. And that's the source of the enthusiasm, the utsaha. That coupled with the detachment, that coupled with the absence of ego, that coupled with that sense of surrender to nature. I'm doing my part. I'm playing my part on stage. Let me play it beautifully. I'm playing my part on stage. Nature will take care of the result. Nature will take care of what all has to happen. Life existed before me. Life will continue to exist after me. I simply have to do my part. That clarity, that sense of surrender, coupled with the initiative, creates incredible utsaha. That's the root for my word, for my name also. Utsaha, utsav, enthusiasm. We have to You have to understand what the root of utsaha, true utsaha is. So the root of true utsaha, of sattvic utsaha, is that sense of initiative, that inspiration, that goal, clarity of one's purpose. That gives unbridled energy, cheerfulness, joy. That spirit of surrender gives cheerfulness. You're able to lift others even when the outcome may not be in your favor. You're able to keep your head when everyone around you is losing it, either in excitement or in despair. See, I mentioned it last class also, when you think of Sattvic actor, I always think of MS Dhoni. Those of you who are cricket fans would have seen him play. He's read the Bhagavad Gita multiple times, by his own admission. He's familiar with this. Perhaps he's inspired by this. That's what's inspired him to be the way he is. So energetic, cheerful, consistent. But all along, all along remains disinterested in the result. So the energy, the utsaha is not coming from a longing for the result. It's coming from initiative. Disinterest in the result means he's not worrying about the result. He's not stressing about the result. See, if there's no, everybody's in a game to win, right? It's not that he doesn't want to win. It's not that you don't want the result. But disinterest in the result contrary to obsession with the result. Of course, you're working for a certain kind of result, but you're not obsessing about it. You're focusing on what needs to be done and you're leaving the result to nature. Nature functions by cause and effect. Nature functions in a certain manner. If you put in the right causes, it will lead to the appropriate effects, the appropriate results. So that clarity gives you a sense of disinterest in the result. Ultimately, as you mature spiritually, success and failure become more and more immaterial. As you gain more and more spiritual growth, success or failure becomes more and more immaterial. You may wonder, what does this mean? Oh, this means that this person is totally not involved. This seems so far from where you and I are. Huh? See, first of all, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages. But the way to interpret this, success and failure means nothing to him, is to compare yourself to a child. A bunch of children are playing a game of Ludo. Success and failure, oh my God, if they win the game of Ludo, their day will be made. Their life will be made according to them. They're playing a game of cricket in the park. If they win that game of cricket, not even cricket, hand cricket. Hand cricket they're playing. If they win that game, oh my God, how much yash, how much fame in the whole society will be there. So for a child, that game means everything. What does it mean for you? Now, if you tell me that you play with the child and you want to compete with the child, then there's something wrong. The game means nothing to you. The game is immaterial. Your interests and your preoccupations and your vision is far beyond a mere game. Because you have grown up. It doesn't mean you won't play the game. You'll entertain yourself with the child, no doubt. Once in a while, you'll entertain yourself. But your vision, your thoughts are far beyond. So success and failure in that game, joy and sorrow from that toys, from those games, means nothing to you. So just as an adult looks as a child, similarly a spiritually enlightened or spiritually evolved person looks at you and me. We are children lost in the games of profit and loss. We're children lost in the game of name and fame. We're children lost in the game of pleasure and excitement and travel and experiences. Just like children are drawing immense pleasure and they think that is the world. They think that is the life. They think their silly game is what life is meant for. Similarly, you and I believe that these passing, trifling experiences These material pleasures are that are all that there is. But as you grow spiritually, you gain a higher vision of life. You gain a purpose beyond material enjoyment. And as you gain, as you ascend that ladder, success and failure in these preoccupations mean less and less. Ultimately, they mean nothing. You get a taste of it. See, if you grow to a even in a business, right? Even in a business, if your vision is to gain, is to create an organization, if your vision is to create a system, then individual success or failure doesn't mean much to you. One off deal that you lose, one off deal that you gain, passing ups and downs in business don't mean much. Those of you who are entrepreneurs would know what I'm talking about. Or when you're driven by a vision or mission, you understand that doing the right things will lead to the right results. Small ups and downs don't mean much. So that's what he means by success and failure mean nothing. They do not distract him from his clarity of what ought to be done. His balance of mind is not impeded. Contrary to a sattvic actor. So a lot is packed into a sattvic actor. No ego, clarity of one's goal and purpose, a sense of detachment, a sense of surrender to nature. The ulta of all of that is a rajasic actor. A lot of ego, a lot of passion, not so much clarity about one's values and goals. He is more driven by instant gratification, immediate results. I can't see beyond his nose. So that desire, that impulsive desire, that immediate desire driving him. No clarity of higher knowledge, which makes him a victim of the all-devouring desire. So Rajasic actor is driven by ego, passion, greed, lust, thirst. And in the absence of knowledge, in the absence of a strong buddhi to guide this, he falls a victim to this very desire. See, it's not a sattvic person doesn't have desire. It's not that the sattvic person doesn't want something. The difference between sattva and rajas is the direction given to desire. The difference between sattva and rajas is the regulation of the desire. The intellect, the buddhi, plays the role of guiding one's desires, regulating them, and refining them. The role of one's buddhi to gain knowledge and to regulate one's mind, regulate one's desires, to guide them in the right direction, to guide them in the direction of one's goals, of one's what one conceives as one's higher purpose, and even refine them, turn them from selfish to unselfish, to selfless. So that's the role of the buddhi. But in rajas, the buddhi is absent. So that very same desire is not given a direction. It just flows in whatever direction. And if it is very strong, see, the desire is like a river. A flow, desires are nothing but a flow of thought. It's like the flow of a river. The same river, if you construct a dam, it can generate electricity. It can create prosperity. The same river, in the absence of that strong banks and perhaps a dam, the same river in the absence of a strong bank will inundate the fields, will cause devastation. You have to go to Assam, or you have to go to see this. Even the Yamuna has in Delhi. The Yamuna has a history of flooding, causing all of Chinese history, all of Chinese civilization is based has been built by that yellow river, which is notoriously known for flooding. So how you are able to channelize that river determines your success today. And of course, Chinese civilization has survived over thousands of years because they've been able to channelize that river. It's metaphorical. I'm being metaphorical. Because they've been able to channelize that river, they are where they are today. Your mind is like a river, it has to be channelized. The intellects are the strong banks which give a direction to the water, which give a direction to your desires, to your thoughts, to your aspirations, to your passions. But in the absence of a buddhi, the same desires will inundate the fields, will cause damage. So that's rajas, where in the absence of a strong buddhi, in the absence of a strong bank, in the absence of clarity, that desire inundates you. It swells. Desire swells into lobha, moha, krodha, mada, matsarya, bhaya. Those of you familiar with these terminologies, the six evils: krodh, lobh, moh, bhaya, mada, matsarya. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 62 and 63. Beautiful verses. He says, Dhyayato Vishayan Punsaha Sangasto Shupajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kaman Kaman Krodha Bhijayate Krodhat Bhavati Sammohaha Sammohat Smriti Vibhramaha Smriti Bhramshat Buddhi Nashaha Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati. A single thought. Dhyayato Vishayan Punsaha. A single thought upon an object. If unguided, if unattended, it swells into sangaha, attachment, means a repeated thought. A thought falls upon an object. If you don't address it then and there, either by guiding it or by dismissing it, what happens? You keep if there's a certain liking, you keep visiting the thought. Sangaha, attachment. That sangaha leads to a stronger flow of thought. So sangaha is like a trickle. Sangaha, a thought is like a drop. Sangaha, attachment, is like a trickle. Sangaha, sangaha sanjayate kaman. Sangaha leads to kamaha. So a trickle leads to a flow. Kamaha means desire. Desire is a flow, a regular flow. What is a desire? A desire is nothing but a regular flow of thought in your mind about the object of your desire. That is the definition of a desire. So a drop has become a trickle, has become a flow. And that same flow turns torrential. After kamaha, it begins to develop an uncontrolled nature. What is that uncontrolled nature? Krodha, lobha. By your own admission, I'm not saying this, by your own admission, you say, I need to control my anger. Why? Because you recognize anger is something that is going out of hand. Lobha, greed. I need to keep a check on my greed. Something that's going out of hand. So the same drop which turned into a trickle, which grew into a flow, is now tending to swell into lobha, krodha. If you don't check it then and there also. If someone doesn't have the humility and the buddhi to correct themselves even at the level of krodha and lobha, when desires are interrupted or not fulfilled, you develop anger. When desires are fulfilled and you don't regulate them, you develop greed, lobha, for more. If you don't check yourself then as well, you develop moha, delusion. Delusion, even God can't help. See, in the Bhagavad Gita we are studying right now, in chapter 16, he says there are 3 gates to hell. The gates of hell are threefold. Matlab, if suppose you're walking towards hell. Now, hell is not a geographical place, okay? This is only dramatized. It's not a it's a mental state. But if you have to, it's geographically described for a only to drive home a message. So imagine you're walking into hell. The Lord says there are three gates to hell. The first gate is desire. The second gate is anger or greed, and the third gate is anger. There are three gates to hell. If you cross all the three gates, welcome to hell. You've entered. Up until then, you're approaching hell, but you've not quite entered it. Up until then, you can pull yourself back. But once you cross, if you don't heed the power of greed, the power of anger, if you turn a blind eye to it, if you dismiss it, if you're arrogant about it, you turn deluded. You see things in your own fashion. You dismiss others. Your mind takes over. Your intellect loses its capacity to see. Your intellect is the tool to salvage yourself, to direct yourself, to guide yourself. The very intellect loses its vitality. It's very difficult to speak to someone who's deluded. We don't get deluded in every aspect of life. We get deluded in in bits and pieces sometimes. So we all have experienced delusion in some form. Wherever there's a strong desire, strong wish, strong attachment, chances are there's delusion. So a rajasic actor, because he is driven by desire and thirst and greed and anger, unchecked, all the chances that he'll fall into his delusion. And this delusion will be the cause of his downfall. You want a live example? Watch Scam 2003. You know Scam 2003? You watch Scam 1992? It seems like I'm the only one who watches TV out here. I have all the time in the world to watch all these shows. Scam 1992 was about the Harshad Mehta scam. And Scam 2003, I believe, was about the Abdul Karim Telgi scam. The stamp paper scam.
Stamp paper.
So in stamp paper scam, and the beauty is one scene where he's telling his partner just when he's beginning, he's saying, "Do you know the amount of stamp papers that are released within a year in India?" And they were doing some calculation. 30,000 crore. He's saying, मैं हलवाई नहीं हूं, मेरे पास बस एक चम्मच है, मुझे हलवा का एक चम्मच चाहिए। ये 30,000 करोड़ का जो हलवा है उसमें से मुझे सिर्फ एक चम्मच चाहिए।
वो हैदराबाद की था।
With one chammach, it ends with diabetes.
He was from Hyderabad.
Rajas begins with one chammach and ends with diabetes. So when desire turns to greed, turns to delusion, turns to downfall, by the end of it, he was deluded. Abdul Karim Teli, he was deluded. He lost his sense of reason. He was doing unreasonable things. There's a clear scene where he got totally carried away by, see, when you become deluded, arrogance takes over, envy takes over. There's one scene where his arrogance totally took over him, and that was the cause of his downfall. People became suspicious of him, and he came into the radar, and of course, he became too big for his boots, as they say. So it's not desire that is per se the problem, it is unchecked desire. Rajasic actor. If you can guide the desire, you'll be sattvic. So desire is not the problem. So this rajas leads to stress, worry, anxiety, strain, all the stress we experience in life. What's behind it is rajas. Contrary to sattvic and rajasic, in a league of its own is tamasic actor. A tamasic actor has no goal, no vision, no purpose, no drive. मैं करूँ आराम सब लोग करे काम. That's the attitude. The expectation that the world will constantly cater to you. Total arrogance, vulgar behavior in thought, word, or deed. No consciousness of another's feelings. So there's laziness and lethargy on one hand. There's vulgar arrogance on the other hand. No sense of one's responsibility, no sense of one's duty. If at all they act, not only man mercy, it's a total confoundedness. So think of all the values of sattva absent, all the energy of rajas absent. That's tamas. The energy of rajas and the values of sattva both are absent. And he continues in buddhi. So the next thing he analyzes is buddhi.
Actor, karta, intellect, buddhi. Sattvic intellect is that which clearly distinguishes between the paths of action and renunciation, chooses that field of activity which is most suitable to one's inherent nature, and rejects what is not. Having chosen the right field, it further decides what ought to be done and what ought not to be done therein, and does one's obligatory duties and responsibilities in life. The Sattvic intellect directs you to fulfill them and avoid involvement in activity outside the sphere. A human being alone faces the problem of choosing his course of action in life. No creature save the human has this dilemma. All others follow distinct patterns of life according to their individual nature, ordered, as it were, to live through it without a choice, whereas the human being has been given the freedom of choice. William Shakespeare, in his play Hamlet, highlights the dilemma of choice in his oft-quoted words, "To be or not to be, that is the question." The Sattvic intellect has the clarity to choose one's course of life. The Sattvic intellect also understands what is to be feared and what ought not to be feared. Certain facets of the world are dreadful. They are detrimental, even fatal. Other facets are beneficial, valuable. Most people in the world court what is fearful and repel what is not. They would freely indulge in the deadly senses, but dread to take the path of knowledge and renunciation. So has Alexander Pope observed, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." The Sattvic intellect chooses the right path. Another serious problem that a human being faces is his self-inflicted bondage. He has lost the freedom of the self. Sattvic intellect draws the distinction between bondage and liberation. It exposes the human weakness in attaching oneself to one's body, mind, and intellect. In being enslaved by their action and perception, emotion, and thought, it provides one the clarity to recognize the glory and grace of the self within. The self alone is the seat of true liberation, free from the persecutions of the world. Thus, freed from bondage, the Sattvic intellect directs a seeker to spiritual enlightenment.
So he spends the majority of time talking about a sattvic intellect, because that's the intellect we want to develop. See, the intellect is a tool. Every human is composed of three equipments. The material aspect of an individual, the material equipments of an individual are of three kinds: the physical body, the senses, which are the senses, this physical body that you see and perceive. Now, through the physical body, you perceive the world, your senses perceive the world, and you act in the world through your organs of action. But it's not just the physical body that is your individuality. Beyond your physical body, there are two other layers of your material personality, non-physical, and they are the mind and the intellect. So there are three tools, there are three equipments: the physical body, and beyond the physical body, you have two non-physical equipments. These are equipments at the level of thought, at the level of um, um, it's non-physical. So what is the distinction between the mind and intellect? It's very important that we make the distinction between the mind and intellect. The mind is the vessel of emotions. The mind is the vessel of emotions. It is composed of your likes and dislikes, your preferences, your desires, your wishes, your hopes, your attachments. That vessel of desires, that vessel of preferences, that vessels of your likes and dislikes is the mind. Now, beyond the mind, distinct from the mind, is your buddhi. So the mind is called manas, and the intellect is called buddhi, intellect. The intellect is your tool of thinking, reasoning, judging, deciding. The intellect is the tool of thinking, reasoning, judging, deciding. It's the tool with which you gain knowledge. It's the tool with which you guide the feelings and emotions of the mind. Is the tool with which you try to understand and comprehend. Is the tool with which you make choices. Very important. See, the tendency is, particularly, being familiar with Western concepts, the tendency is to think of the mind and intellect as the head and the heart. The intellect being the head and the mind being the heart. I would tell you, please resist that. Don't do that. It is not the concept of head and heart. The moment we create head and heart, we think, oh, head means all the rational thoughts, mind means all the emotional thoughts, and a person who follows the mind and not the head is very excitable and very passionate. The person who follows the head and not the heart is very clear but very dull and very boring. We have all these preconceived notions. Please don't do that. Don't mistaken this concept of mind and intellect with head and heart. Right? The mind is a vessel of feelings and emotions. The intellect is a tool for thinking and reasoning. They both coexist. They both coexist. They are both in contact with each other. They are both connected to each other. The point is, which is stronger? See, a weak buddhi means an incapacity to think, an incapacity to choose. You'll be more confused, you'll be less clear, you'll not have the capacity to reason, you'll tend to imitate others. You'll be driven more by the immediate impulse, which the mind throws you, rather than thinking through things, right? On the contrary, a strong intellect is one that weighs, that measures, that assesses the situation as well as what one's mind is wanting, right? So it listens to everything. It listens to one's own mind, it listens to the world, and it comes to a logical, reasonable conclusion. That's the role of the buddhi: to think, reason, judge, decide, assess, question, investigate, understand. All these capacities is what is driven by the buddhi. So is your buddhi strong or is it weak? Is your buddhi aligned to higher values or is it confused and confounded? That's what determines your success or failure. That is what determines your growth as a human being or your descent into worse than an animal. See, a human being alone has a buddhi. A human being alone has been given this dilemma of choice, he says, to be or not to be. All other creatures, they almost have a predetermined set of life. Their minds have certain impulses, and which is aligned with the varying seasons. When you look at the life of a dog, when it wants to eat, when it wants to sleep, when it wants to use the bathroom, when it wants to mate, there are seasons when it wants to mate, and it aligns to the seasons in nature. So it almost is like a preset programmed, in which year, in which time of the year you will migrate to which part of the world. If you look at the great migration in Africa, it almost seems like the inner clock of an animal is set to the outer clock of nature, and there's a sync. So it doesn't have to think much. Oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? There's basic thinking. There's basic choice that an animal has to make. Largely, it doesn't have to make a choice because its plan is almost set in sync with nature. Only a human being has to think. Only a human being has to think. Only a human being has been given a complex mind which throws up all sorts of desires. Only a human being is gifted with the buddhi. The reason you and I have been gifted with the buddhi is because we have to make the choices for ourselves. And that choice can help us ascend to greater heights, far greater than any animal is capable of. That same intellect, if not utilized, can destroy us. Hmm? So, what is a sattvic intellect? Building a sattvic intellect will determine not only spiritual progress, but even to a large extent material success. A sattvic buddhi, these are three things he identifies in the actual verse. A sattvic buddhi distinguishes three things. A, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. The path of action and the path of renunciation. Means what you should do and what you should not do. Second thing, what should be feared, what should not be feared. What you should be wary of, what you should be concerned about, and what you should not be concerned about. The third thing is, what is bondage, what is liberation, what is keeping you entangled, and what is setting you free. Clarity about those three things. A sattvic buddhi has clarity about those three things. If you have clarity about these three things, you have a sattvic buddhi. Most of us are convinced, but we end up realizing perhaps what we thought was wrong. Most of us are confused whether I should do this or not do this, confused about the path of action and renunciation. Most of us are confused about, should I worry about this, should I not worry about this. The extent to which we have a sattvic buddhi, to that extent we have that clarity. What is rajasic, what is tamasic, and of course I will go into much more detail about the sattvic buddhi. It's a notion. Discussing these 3 points is a notion in itself. So we'll take this up in further detail in the next class. So with that thought, we'll conclude today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them up right now. Else we'll meet next Monday. So are there any questions? So I would highly urge you to make sure you're reading the text, and particularly this portion, because it's very, so each word, each thought is very meaningfully put here, and it requires your analysis. Just like the sattvic buddhi has 3 aspects: clarity about what ought to be done, what ought not to be done, what ought to be feared, what ought not to be feared, what is bondage, what is liberation, and the elaboration of each of these 3 things. It's very important that we read carefully, otherwise we'll miss it. And otherwise that defeats the purpose of our in-depth study out here. So I would urge you that when we convene next, you sort of read up, particularly this portion of the personality chart, and come prepared, because there is a flow of thought which you are following. You would have noticed the flow of thought from jnanam to karma to karta, and now in buddhi. The flavors of sattva, rajas, tamas in each of these three. There's a string that is connecting all of this. So I would urge you to definitely read up before class. If there are no questions, we'll conclude today's class and we'll see you bright and early on Monday morning. So have a good rest of the week. Have a good time. Take care and see you on Monday. Hari Om.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hari Om.